South Africa is holding its breath today as the ANC chooses a new leadership in Johannesburg. We decided to come to the offices of the South African Institute of Race Relations to talk to its Cheif Economist, Ian Cruickshanks, about some of the statements being made by ANC officials at the conference, and also to get a better understanding of the concerns coming through from the business community. Ian, how crucial is this election for the business sector?
I think it's of vital importance because the leadership of the major political party will determine whether we have a private sector-led economy or we have a socialist public sector-led economy. And I think what we've seen is that we need to go more towards the private sector leading the economy, because that has been shown to work in the rest of the free world. The public sector economy, the public sector-led economy has not been a success. It's been a history of failures and of slow development.
The market opened stronger this morning. Is it backing Cyril Ramaphosa?
I think so. I think that Cyril Ramaphosa, with his business experience, is seen as being basically business friendly, as having an understanding of what makes business tick, of how the best benefit can be to shareholders, to those who are looking for jobs. So you've got job creation, you've got consumer spending. All this is rolled into his outlook that we must have private-public participation in partnerships. By doing that, you get the expertise of the private sector with the backing, both public and capital, of the public sector. And I think there's that understanding and the belief that he could lead us further in that direction is what's led to an improvement in the Rand exchange rate. And it's been hugely volatile. There's such uncertainty. I mean, it's traded today between 12 Rand 70 to 13 Rand 10 to the dollar. That just says the massive uncertainty, and we must remember that in the meantime there's nothing that markets hate more than anything else, and that's uncertainty. So nobody knows where to go just yet.
Having said that, Ian, over the last year, have we been witnessing frustration coming through in the markets over leadership in this country?
I think so, because we've seen it when we talk about leadership. We want to know about the state-owned enterprises which you mentioned. We want to know that those with the ability to run big corporations, who have the management expertise, who know how to trim costs and not just to employ people willy-nilly at unrealistic rates. I think that understanding has led to the thought that if we get a more private sector-led economy, we will get a better benefit for all and sundry, whether it's just state-owned, and state-owned enterprises accumulate even more of the power of the central party, that we're not likely to get ahead.
State capture is a big issue for everyone in South Africa right now. What do you make of the manner in which it was dealt with at this conference?
I think it was glossed over. I think that it's disappointing. There were no plans about what we're going to do about rescuing SAA. Hey, it's insolvent. And by the way, so is the SABC, and so are any other number of state-owned enterprises. Eskom is on its knees when it comes to funding. They had the nerve, the cheek, to go and ask for a 20% increase in tariffs from NERSA, the National Electricity Regulator, and it got cut back to 5%, which is still way over inflation. But there's no understanding that if you want to grow an economy, your basic economic inputs must be no higher than the inflation rate. Otherwise, it's a lost leader waiting for an implosion.
One of the ANC officials at the conference mentioned that state capture should be forgiven like apartheid was forgiven. Is this a fair way of moving the country forward?
We can't turn the clock back. You can't reverse history. Just like we're trying to get over the problems of apartheid. How are we doing that? We're bringing people into the economy. We're bringing people into government. We're bringing people into management. People who were previously quite unjustifiably not allowed to participate in those areas. So what do we do now? Let's bring in the private sector into government, into the state-owned enterprises, into management where they have proven expertise. If they would look at it that way, I think that we'd all benefit. We'd have more profitability from companies. We'd have more investment. We'd have more jobs. Doesn't that sound like we wanted?
In Johannesburg, the mayor was criticized severely recently by the ANC in terms of his approach to fighting corruption. He's very actively involved in fighting corruption in the city. Is this a fair statement to be made by the ANC, given that the mayor has uncovered 17 billion rand worth of corruption to date?
I don't think so. If you're rebuilding a building, Start with the foundations. Don't start with the top floor if you've got leaking foundations. Start with the base. Clean that up. Get it straightened. Strengthen it. Then you've got a place from which you can build. And I think that that should be understood, that that is what the mayor is trying to do. I think Herman has got the right idea that, start with a strong base. Don't start with the flag on the top.
Ian, remind us how this elective conference will impact on the local economy of Johannesburg.
Well, not to take the conference in isolation. After all, there's a very small benefit for those who are geographically close to it. But I think it's vitally important in the decision as to whether we go more towards a consumer-led private sector, open barriers to foreigners' participation, or else we get stricter and we get tighter and we don't let anybody see in because then we know they're not going to like the view inside. I think we've just got to open our doors and say, hey, come in and help wherever it is, in whichever way, if it's capital provision or management.
I want to touch on one or two things mentioned by the Minister of Finance, Malusi Gigaba. He says that the incoming leadership must focus on growing this economy. But as an economist, give us a more realistic overview of what is required from government side to ensure that we are firmly on this path of growing the economy.
Let me give you a quote made by a leading company who have just left South Africa, an international company in the motor industry. They said to us 3 years ago, in reply to the question of what were they going to develop their company within the economy. 3 conditions, they said. Certainty of assets, assuredness of the value of their assets. You don't get that by saying you've got a BEE regulation and it's 20%, we'll take it. And then when you see the business is going well, saying, actually, you've just put it up to 51%. I know that means you lose control, but if you want to stay, that's the price. That's not giving them any certainty of the value of their assets. The second point he made was they want a constant, reliable, cost-effective electricity supply. Now, yes, there's enough at the moment, only because the economy is so much in the doldrums, but as soon as demand picks up, there won't be enough. All those middle and older aged transmission stations are going to find that they're running out of the ability to transmit electricity. So he said, until you get all of that electricity supply and development and cost effectiveness cleaned up, we can't start anything new. And by the way, he said, your labour movement have got to understand there's a straight line. They want more on the payment side, then they must do more on productivity. If you get greater productivity, you can get greater reward. Understanding that line is fundamental in deciding whether we employ your labour here or we go elsewhere.
He also mentioned the need to focus on radical economic transformation. He says we need to focus on the forgotten people that are deprived. What are the concerns around this policy from the business sector?
It sounds like he wants the business sector to play Robin Hood. Shoot your arrows through the rich, the wealthy, take what they have and give it to the poor. I think he is developing an understanding that we've got to find a way, if we want to redistribute. Let's start with education. Let us teach a man to fish rather than give him a fish. That way he can feed himself for a long time thereafter. And I think Mr. Gigaba is getting the hang of it, that yes, he wants redistribution, but he knows that it can't be done just by gifts. It has to be done by education and participation in management.
Ian, is the National Development Plan still relevant in today's political and economic climate? And if it is, Ian, have we moved away from this?
It is a sound plan. It's the best of what we had. Put it that way. There's never going to be any panacea for all. We're never going to say, okay, this is going to suit us all and is the best we can do for every sector. That's unrealistic. But I think we have moved away from that. We've moved to a concentration on government first, everybody else stand in line afterwards. We've got a concentration on public sector on its own, without participation from the private sector. And I think that this is a step backwards. I think there's many steps backwards. Until we change that process, we're not going to make constant, reliable, ongoing progress in building this economy where we have job creation, give people a reason for wanting to go to work, give everybody the right to participate in a growing economy. We're nowhere near that at the moment.